welcome Bob Troia to the Upgraded Executive Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
No, it's great to have you here. So Bob, I'd like to get started with just a little bit of understanding around your background and what led you into biohacking.
Sure. So my background is really in software development and technology. I've been working in the space for several decades. Started my career as a software engineer, built some businesses over the years that were in the technology-driven digital marketing space.
Yeah.
So I've always had this kind of technical, kind of inquisitive mind, even going back to childhood, teens, et cetera, where I was trying to start measuring and tracking things, understanding, for example, in sports and performance. And, we didn't have the tools or technologies we did today, but I just think it's something that's been it's been a constant thing throughout my entire life. And really, the sort of biohacking side of things really emerged out of another community called the Quantified Self movement, which launched probably about 10 years ago or so, where people were sort of getting together to kind of share their common interest in understanding themselves better through data. Not necessarily all about biohacking or health or the body. It could be anything, within life. It could be things like driving your car or tracking what books you read, et cetera. Within that community, though, there was definitely a focus, a lot of it around understanding and optimizing our biology, our health, et cetera. I think given my background and exposure to both communities, I think that's what's kind of allowed me to sort of apply both principles and figure out not just what works or doesn't work, but it's really about what works for me. And you will have different results, most likely. And so that's the beauty of what we call single subject experiment design.
Many of the people that we've spoken to that has sort of entered the space around biohacking or health optimization, I've found a lot of them have had some kind of call to action, whether it's been some kind of health related issue or something else going on in their life. Have you had anything in that space, Bob, where you really thought, I really need to fix that thing?
There was, I would say, a call to action was really where I actually thought I was doing great. Like I was working out every day, exercising, playing sports. I was in a band, playing music, doing all these things, and I was staying at the top of my game in all areas of life. But there was this kind of moment where I was kind of just out of energy. I was exhausted and I kind of broke down, but nobody could see it. And I was just I was inside, I was just exhausted. And I had to sort of figure out what was I doing wrong, what was going on. And that kind of led me down the path of starting to work with functional integrative practitioners, looking at underlying issues, realizing these things that have been lingering in my body for years that I've just been able to sort of kind of bury, put off, and still be able to maintain a high level of performance, but it catches up to you at some point. Even my mentality around things like diet and nutrition, I was realizing, wow, I thought what I was eating was super, super clean and healthy. And I had to kind of change that mindset for myself, that I was eating this super healthy diet, super no fat, eating lean, like chicken, no skin, basically egg whites and all these things that I had to rethink the way I eat. And by adding in things for me, healthy saturated fats and just shifting my nutrient composition and things, I was just it just gave me so much more energy. Things like testosterone levels jumped up and I was wow, this is, pretty eye-opening. But the gateway to that was really just something as simple as, putting some butter and MCT oil in your coffee, and you realize you're getting some of these fats in the morning that you get this cognitive kind of improvement where I was just wow, I feel I'm on. I'd go to work and I was I'm super sharp. I'm getting a bunch of things done. And that for me was the kind of the gateway. And I think for a lot of people that is, and it's not about measuring anything, and that's subjective. Through lab testing and other things, realizing, well, yeah, you got bit by a tick 15 years ago and you caught it very early, and there's Lyme disease. You didn't really have the symptoms, but there's a lot of things like co-infections, and they shot you up with a lot of antibiotics that wrecked your gut, and you've got all these issues going on, kind of under the hood that I was really opened my eyes to wow, there's a lot of things going on. And that kind of led me down a path of, how do you, as you peel, we use this analogy about peeling back the layers of the onion, you kind of just go deeper and deeper and learning more about yourself and being what else is going on here? And you can keep going, pretty much all the way down. But I spent years sort of building, rebuilding things and getting myself back to a place where I was wow, okay, now everything's firing on all cylinders. And then it's all about, okay, now you maybe, let's say you feel great, but can I even feel better? Because you realize at some point when you feel good, even if you thought you were good and you feel better, you're well, that means I was going through life with, there's another analogy of the having like the parking brake on your vehicle on, and you're driving and it's like dragging you along, but you're like, you're moving. But when you take that brake off, you're like, whoa, this is amazing, And I think, that's sort of the long-term sort of thing we all seek. We seek this level of optimization, self-optimization. And, let's say we can never get to 100%, but that's a great goal to have. And even if we get 90% of the way there, 95, you're going to feel better than when you're at 50. That's how I look at things.
Bob, can you just take us through some of your favorite things that you track on a consistent basis?
Sure. I would say, we have to think of tracking as a number of like layers, in that there's things that you want to largely have being tracked passively, so it's not a burden to you. The data's there, even if you're not even going to ever look at it. You've got the data. Maybe you can go back a year from now, 2 years from now. And then you've got things that are done kind of more like you have to do the intervention. So let's say that the passively tracked stuff could be things like, anyone who's wearing some kind of sleep activity tracker, it's collecting that information. And I don't think it has to be burdensome or, tracking a million things. I mean, there's as much to be said about things like subjective variables, like how do you feel? What's your mood? You can, on a scale of 1 to 5, just start tracking it and see, and then you kind of find like the trends and see like, why was this dipping over these weeks or days? And you can figure out what else was going on in your life that maybe affected that. I have like sensors in my home that will track air quality, et cetera. So I can, for example, see how environment affects my sleep, that kind of thing. Yeah. Then, on a day-to-day basis, like we're all probably have some kind of smart scale. We're looking at body composition, day to day, and keep in mind that stuff's, the body composition part of those scales can be off pretty significantly, even day to day. But really what you want to look at is if you've got enough data, you can actually draw a trend line, and if it's overshooting and undershooting by a certain amount, you'll actually see a pretty accurate trend line there. And then what I would do is maybe like once every, let's say maybe 6 months, I would go do what's called a DEXA scan, which is it creates like it kind of looks into you, and you can find really accurate body composition assessment, bone density, etc. There's cool like 3D body scanners now that you stand on a podium, and it basically has these like depth cameras that will create a 3D model of your body. So for a lot of people that are less concerned about knowing what the actual number percentage of body fat or something is, they just want to see like, am I changing, my appearance changing, or am I gaining muscle of my arms and losing some in the waist? You can actually see it, month to month, let's say, and it takes like a minute to do. And there's facilities that have these devices. It's not that expensive. On the recovery side and readiness, heart rate variability. Yeah. So I'll often do before I even get out of bed in the morning, the first thing I do when I wake up is I do like a 2-minute reading to get heart rate variability, which will be a different value than if you wear certain devices that are going to track overnight heart rate variability while you're sleeping. The numbers will be different, but it's really just about, again, trends. And you can figure out when the number is off, just way off. It's kind of like, okay, you should not train super hard today. Or you can actually, if you start seeing it dip over days, you can actually almost predict like you're going to get sick. And there's certain things you just know, like if you went out to a birthday party or celebration the night before, and maybe someone had a few too many glasses of wine, like the next day you're gonna, and you don't need you probably don't need to measure HRV to know like you're pretty much, you should take it easy that day. So I'll look at things like that. Periodically, it's good to do some checks on things like blood pressure. There's home blood pressure cuffs that you can get really inexpensively. It's a nice thing to trend. You don't have to do it every day, but instead of going to the doctor once a year and they take a reading, which is already going to be elevated just by going into like a doctor's office, you're a little you probably ran there, you're running late. It's good to kind of do it in a very relaxed setting at home. You do one in the morning, one in the evening, just to see. It's a good thing to trend, to understand, are you dealing with some potential hypertension issues, things like that. Depending on experiments or diet, et cetera, like I will track my blood sugar, so glucose tracking. You can get inexpensive glucose meters that you just prick your finger, take a reading, and you can just do fasted readings to kind of understand your baselines and see are you in a pretty good, what's considered optimal zone range for that, or if you're trying to actually look at things like, I've done experiments with seeing how certain foods or meals affect the spike you get, and you want to minimize how high this glucose rises and for how long. And it can become a little burdensome in that if you're taking like every hour, 15 minutes, like readings with your, you're pricking your finger over and over. So now there's these continuous glucose monitors you can get where it's like a little, about that big of a sensor. It goes on the back of your arm and it's tracking constantly, and you can pull the data off so you can see what's happening when like you're sleeping. Again, it's very passive, so it's nice to have. The only challenge is they're a bit expensive and they last for about 2 weeks max. So it's probably something I would throw on once every maybe 3 months if I'm going to do it, and I try to maximize the time I have it on by if I'm trying to gain any insights or do any experiments. That's the day-to-day stuff. That's really kind of the, you don't have to go too complicated with it. There's a lot of things like you can go crazy with lab tests. You can go crazy with all these devices and gadgets and things that you may use every day or not. Like, I've got a whole sort of room full of weird equipment and gear. And some of the things it's cool to break out every now and then or use for like a week and then put it back away. You don't need to do it every day because I think, we're all burdened with time, right? So like, I think a lot of people get scared away from a lot of this tracking because they realize it's going to be time consuming. And I want people to understand that it doesn't have to be. And for me, it might seem like I track a lot of things and do a lot of data collection, but it's something I've built over years. So I've built these layers that allow a lot of it to be passively collected. So I'm not spending, hours a day trying to track things, or, things are largely being collected. I can go back and look at the data later if I need to, or, test a theory or find some cool, interesting insight or correlation. And that's how I've been approaching it. But I think people can start just very, on a very simple level, just trying to understand themselves a little more. People get really kind of worked up about the information from sleep, and you have to realize that even the best sleep tracker out there is probably, and this is what I just heard anecdotally, it's probably maybe 60 in terms of sleep stage detection. Maybe 60%, 55, 60%, so I tell people what's more important when you're looking at sleep data is understanding that, okay, what time did you fall asleep? What time did you wake up? Were there interruptions during the night? Because to me, that is the most, it's about sleep timing, sleep consistency, and uninterrupted sleep. And I think, where something's saying like I had a similar issue, I have an Oura Ring as well. Now, with me, it's actually the opposite. It gives me very little REM. So, what I realized was, after talking to some other people, I started looking at their hands, and I was like, well, I've played sports, I've broken fingers and things, so my knuckles have a certain shape. So the ring has to kind of get over the finger and sit a certain way. And I realized that a lot of people have similar type of fingers. I always have lower REM reporting on the device. I also wear multiple devices to sleep, because I look for second and third opinion on some things. And I also tell people, we have to keep in mind, don't accept that you're collecting data, but understand the context, understand that things can have everything has a margin of error, even when you're tracking blood sugar, glucose, and all that.
You're absolutely right. The devices aren't 100% accurate, and therefore, would you say people should be looking at the trends and really focus on the trends more rather than comparing their data point to somebody else's data point?
Well, yes. And also I think people tend to go right into they start tracking their sleep, and then they start obsessing over why they're not getting enough deep sleep. And I was like, well, you have to start up here first, understand, am I getting enough sleep? Am I getting uninterrupted? And then you can go deeper and deeper. Some people want to start all the way down at the super detailed pieces of information. And so I often tell people to do is, this is something anyone can do actually, if you have a sleep tracker. You can keep wearing it and whatever, but start trying to predict what it says. So you wake up in the morning, and you're actually training yourself to be in tune with your body and go, how do I feel? And you kind of, think of REM. So the way we used to do this back in athletics and stuff, the coaches would ask us, they were trying to understand how many sleep cycles we had. So they were like, how many dreams did you have last night? Because each dream is a sleep. It's telling you how to, you go from deep sleep to light to REM back down, and you go through cycles overnight. Most of your deep sleeps are earlier in the night. Most of the REM gets closer and closer. The cycles get shorter as you get closer to waking up. But you can sort of wake up every morning and just go, how do I feel? Am I refreshed? Am I whatever? And you try to and that works with things even like heart rate variability. I'll often that's one number I can often just be like, how do I feel right now? I don't think it's any flaw necessarily in the hardware. I think there's things like user error. It's gonna if a ring's spinning around on your finger and the sensors are all in one spot, Sure, that can happen.
How much internal work that you've done, either using technology or mindfulness, and how that equated with the other stuff that you're talking around in terms of maximizing sleep, energy, and diet. But how much internal mind work that you've done?
I would say the internal mind work is a more recent development or set of tools I've added. For me, largely it's because I'm very technology driven. I was a little hesitant about things like meditation, mindfulness, and all of that for a number of years. And I was basically like, well, if I can measure it, things like there's like the Muse headband and things have come out that let people kind of see what's going on. There's a device called M-Wave. It's an inner balance by HeartMath. And what it does is it tries to get you to breathe. You're following a little breath pacer, and it's trying to get what's called a state of coherence, where your heart variability and your breathing and your blood pressure, et cetera, are all in sync. And it's a stress reduction tool, essentially. You learn how to kind of do that over time. I then got into deeper sort of breath work, like Wim Hof style breathing and these other techniques that folks like Dan Brule and other folks. And those are things that like just take a few minutes a day. Like I feel a pretty big shift in myself if I do that in the morning, or you can basically do breath work anytime. There's different breathing patterns that will bring the body into different states. So I definitely go in that route. And in terms of other tools, like, because I'm a technology guy, so I'm like, my long-term girlfriend she's a mindfulness meditation instructor and yoga instructor. So she comes at it from one direction and I come at it from a different direction. But we realized long ago that we're trying to get to the same place. I'm just the guy that's like, I just have to prove and quantify and measure, like, what's actually happening. So I've done things like, I'll often use tools like binaural beats. So audio and light entrainment. It's basically, you can get the mind, you can put the body into a state. So for 20 minutes, it's almost like I go off on this like power nap, not actually falling asleep. And then you snap out of it. And I've done that through combinations of, there's mostly, binaural beats it's audio based. A lot of people are going to use apps that perhaps walk you through like a 5 or 10 minute meditation, which I think are great for people. And you especially if you realize like you have to start very simple and then you gain the experience being more aware of your body and you can take it a little deeper and deeper. But sometimes I'm just looking for the shortcut, which I guess some people argue that that's not from a mindfulness meditation standpoint. Like, are you, if you're trying to perhaps resolve some issues in yourself, like maybe I'm not dealing with it still, but it's like you're just giving yourself the chance to recover and have some, a state for a little while. But so there's all sorts of tools. Breath work, I actually enjoy it. I really enjoy it. I enjoy going pretty deep on the breath work. I enjoy, you even start combining it with things like cold exposure and all of that. And I mean, it doesn't cost anything. Like a lot of these folks in the biohacking world, it's all about going and buy cool tools and gadgets and spending all this money and breathing's free. It's like, there's really you don't have to spend any money.
I guess utopia is going to be, we have all of this passive monitoring that is going on. We're able to say, take our genetics, our blood work, hormone panel, and then be able to combine it all and then give that sort of like a really good 360 view of where we are now and then what we need to address in the future.
No, exactly. I mean, we're all seeking this like magic. I always tell people it's this like a check engine light that, it's kind of show us where we're at. And so some of it obviously are more like genetics where, okay, this is what you were born with. And, you may have a certain percentage predisposition to things. And then you have to layer on top of that epigenetics, which is the effects of our lifestyle and our environment. Cause that's stuff that can change more acutely. And then, then the data. So then there's kind of like, what were you born with? What are you doing long-term that's affecting things? And then where are we day to day? So when you wake up in the morning, it says, hey, Bob, you should take these vitamins today and you need to do this and you should exercise and this is going on and go to sleep at this time. And so, I think that's where we want it all to go. It's this sort of like, I can go through my life, be very productive and efficient and just something guiding me to tell me what to do, whether it's, automated through technology or some combination of a team of practitioners, coaches, et cetera. So I think, we're getting there. It's just like we're able to measure a lot of things now that we just, even 5 years ago we couldn't. So we look at things like microbiome testing and all of that, and it's largely like it's like they can measure everything, but they don't quite know yet what they're looking at. So it's one thing to say to people, like, you've got these percentages of the different bacteria and stuff in your gut. But in terms of like where, looking at that needle in the haystack and what does that really all mean? What's the other stuff they're detecting in there? And so there's a few companies now where they're saying, okay, what's the sort of low-hanging fruit in terms of like insights we can give people? We can actually turn this microbiome data into something actionable. And the first thing that's happening now is there's a couple companies that are able to basically, based on the makeup of your microbiome at the time you took the test, so keep in mind it's always going to be shifting and changing. They're able to make dietary recommendations in terms of knowing which foods will do things like spike your blood sugar, things that your body responds to better or worse. And so I think the personalized nutrition side of that is the first, because they're not making any like medical, they can play in the wellness space. And I think they've done enough research, there's been enough studies that show they can validate that their sequencing and their testing on microbiome actually can do some accurate predictions. So, and I think that's something any consumer can get, it's like saying, instead of just saying, I went and did a microbiome test and it gave me all this information, all these bacteria. I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. And most people don't know, they don't care. Or like, but they want to know, like, I did the test and it's telling me like, you know what, I should not be eating that. I should be eating more of that because actually that's going to help my body actually respond better to that. And that's a good way of how a lot of these companies can start, taking very complicated systems and giving people very simple, actionable insights.
Yeah, I've had experience with Viome in the past, both myself and with my clients. And what they found is that when they eat aligned to Viome's recommendations, their energy levels start increasing massively. So I think anything that these organizations can do to give you sort of data-enabled insights, but actually give you the actions to take off the back of it, then it becomes a lot more powerful for people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's why, if I think early on, when you're getting with the microbiome testing, whether it's Viome, there's some other companies even before or now, it would just give you the information. You can get like, well, I don't even know if Viome gives you the raw data, but there are other ones that would give you all the raw data. The problem is it's like all this data that we don't even really know what a lot of it even means, or we have the technology to sequence all this stuff, but we don't, until science goes in and figures out like what things map to some issue, like condition or predisposition. But I do think giving someone like who doesn't have to be a technology person, doesn't have to be data driven, just says, I did the test. I know that I'm getting, like you said, an insight that I know is going to make me feel like I have more energy. And that's, and that's something where maybe today, maybe they're overcoming some issues. They have to modify their diet because maybe someone is like, well, I put butter in my coffee and it says I can't have butter, aggressive butter. And it's like, yeah, right now it's irritating something in your system that's not, you need to cut back on it. In 6 months though, it may be like one of the superfoods or whatever that you can do. But as of right now, you need to this is the way your body's responding to things. And people often, when it goes against their sort of initial or current beliefs, they get a little, worked up about it. But it's, but you have to realize the body, we're always changing. And so to get yourself to where you want to be, sometimes you have to cut things out or make some changes. And it's not a permanent change. It could be a temporary change.
Bob, what's the weirdest experiment that you've done?
The weirdest?
The weirdest, yeah.
I mean, there's some that are just, I guess, quirky. Like these are more just like trying to understand myself better. So this is more kind of, I guess, I've done a couple of experiments where I just want to understand my body's response to different situations. So I've done experiments where I would track my body's physiological response. Like I would go to like an IMAX sci-fi movie and just have be tracking a bunch of things, and then I would measure my body's response throughout the movie. So let's say it's action packed or things scary you or whatever. And I wanted to see like what, like, it was interesting to see because like I realized how this is being used now by marketers and things too. They can trigger a response in the body. So like, and so I was measuring, just how my stress levels would change through a movie, or my heart rate would slow down when it was a really like tense scene. You're very focused, and just seeing like things like galvanic skin response, which is like, kind of sweat perspiration. It's another kind of sign of proxy of like nervousness or stress. And so, yeah, and it was cool to like, cause if you actually knew the storyline of the movie, you can look at the data and see the scenes and be like, what happened here? What happened here? And maybe there was a part where it was like really boring. And I was like, yeah, nothing's really going on there. I've also done the similar experiments with gambling. So, just seeing how my body responds to things like winning and losing and anticipation and all of that, which is kind of, just, again, these are, what do I do with that information? It's, I guess for gambling, if I show, like, can I figure out what my tells are if I'm playing poker against somebody? For me, I think when gambling, it was almost like when you look at like kind of stress levels and all that, it was weird. It was like, if I lost, I wasn't, my stress level, I was actually not as worried about losing as I was more excited by winning. So it wasn't like stress brought me like really low. It was actually like the highs of winning were much higher than the offset by the lows of losing. And, which is, again, it's just understanding how our bodies react to things and our psychology or physiology. But there's like weird things. I mean, there's things that I guess I don't consider weird that people probably would, who are new to tracking. Like, we talk a lot about things like, when we say microbiome testing, right? What are we doing? It's stool testing, right? We're measuring a stool. So, but like in certain cultures, like stool, like it tells a lot about your health too. Like in terms of, there's something called the Bristol stool scale, where basically you can assess things like, your digestion. You can see if like things are normal, if out of whack, based on your diet, or you're getting sick or other issues. And that's something that people can track. It's a scale of like 1 to 5 basically. And people do that often where they're trying to diagnose, like if they've got some digestive issues or, even more extreme things, where, they're dealing with 1 degree constipation, 1 degree, diarrhea. I often try to look for things that are like, what's a proxy to another piece of data? So, you can do all sorts of lab testing, spend lots of money, but I realize like there's certain things that we can do that like I use for longevity. A lot of research has shown, because it's a very easy study to do, is grip strength correlates really well with things like longevity. And you can get like a little hand dynamometer, which doesn't cost that much money. And you can just basically do a couple grip tests every day, do 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening, both, your dominant hand will be stronger, but it maps to these population studies that show kind of where you're at. And so I think for people that want to assess over the years, like where you're at, grip strength is kind of like a simple proxy there. And there's another, a simple sensor I have it looks like a pulse oximeter, but it's actually measuring what's called pulse wave velocity. It's a proxy to arterial stiffness. So the same way, again, it's another way to kind of correlate cardiovascular health. So perhaps if you'll notice, like if you're sedentary or you start exercising more or more cardiovascular training and stuff like that, you'll see that your pulse wave velocity will change, it will move in a positive direction. But it's not something that you can necessarily, again, it's not a day-to-day thing, it's a trend. But it's a cool, like, if you're going to think of like what are some nice proxies to other, like I say, like blood sugar, heart rate variability, trends, and pulse wave velocity, those types of things are, and obviously you can go into blood testing, look at inflammatory markers and all of that. But so there's like all sorts of things you can measure out there. But I think often we're looking for like, what's the simple thing? If I just check this 1 or 2 things, like it's going to give me a sign or a gauge of where I am, and I think that's what a lot of this is about, is trying to just figure out what those nice little proxies are that give us a general sense of things. Nice.
That's a great idea, Bob. Bob, we've spoken about sort of how I phrased it as some of the weirder things that you've done, which don't sound weird to me at all. But have any of your experiments gone wrong?
I do a lot of sort of self-experiments and all these types of things, but I research the hell out of things, and I always weigh the risk reward to things. So it's one thing, say like, yeah, I'm just going to do it because why not? I often will say like, okay, there's potential risk here. Let me mitigate whatever that is. And it could be something as simple as like, there's a needle and you could get an infection. So make sure that things are sterile. Right? So I would say, most of the things that have gone wrong are often where you have an unexpected detox reaction. So you're triggering some response in the body that has a huge detoxification, which basically just means you're going to feel like crap for like a while. And I've had that happen with like oxygen exposure. I've had that like concentrated oxygen, ozone, sauna, like extreme sauna stuff, certain supplements will, and so I just learned that, I go into it knowing like that's a potential of like something that would happen. And I know it's a temporary thing. And so, it's not necessarily putting me at any risk, but it's just like, feel like, I just, now I knocked myself out for a day. I feel like, I feel terrible, but I'll be fine, in another day or so. So,
yeah.
There's been some funny stories where, a lot of us experiment with or use like light therapy or photobiomodulation. We use that to shine on our bodies. We feel charged up, or we use it, some people like just use it for skin, collagen production. But I've done things where I've shined the lights on my scalp, and some of the more powerful lights will they'll go through the skull and they can get to your brain. And I think there was one time in particular where, like, I know I did a session, I overdid it, I guess, because I did the session, and then all of a sudden I went to go do work. I'm sitting at my computer, and I was sending off some emails. And at one point I kind of do like a double take, and I looked down at what I was typing, and it was complete gibberish. Like I had like scrambled like whatever in my head, but it was like, 20 minutes later it started like going away. But I didn't realize it until I was actually like, typing out these emails and just realizing like I upregulated something or scrambled something, and it, but it's a temporary thing. It wasn't, no long-term issues.
I think it's a really good point, though. It's something that Ben and I always stress. Make sure you do your research before you try anything new, because as we said at the start, we're all biologically different, and we'll all respond to different things in different ways. So just be careful, do your research, and start slowly is our advice.
Yeah, and depending on what it is, the risk reward. If the risk is too high, well, if there's a risk that's high and you still it's something you're interested in, then I'd always say to people, like, you can find some supervision. You can find certain, doctors, like a lot of people are getting into peptides now, and and even there, like, it's quality and sourcing. It's like I did a ton of research, because I was like, I'm not going to buy cheap peptides from certain, parts of the world where you don't know if the lab reports they include with them are completely made up. So even with something like that, it's like, okay, the worst, perhaps there's heavy metals and things. So worst case is you can really screw yourself up. The lesser worst case could be that it just has no effect because you're buying something that's not authentic. It's not actually what it says. But I've seen certain things, even with the peptides. There's like one called melanotan that will actually turn on your pigments in your skin. And so I had a friend who's very fair skinned, and he's got red hair and some freckles. And he was like, I want to get a suntan in the summer. I never tan, I only burn. So he did a cycle of this melanotan peptide, and it basically, because he was a redhead, and it turned his red hair brown, and it's just all the freckles on his body got really dark. So it did create the desire to, there's an effect that it said it would do, but he didn't realize like it would look as, the way it did. But it works very similar to like a suntan that will go back after a certain amount of time. But it was just another one of those things where, I imagine it created some funny moments.
Have you dyed your hair?
Yeah, exactly. And I went back after a month. Yeah.
Brilliant. So if somebody's interested in starting to quantify themselves and start to track some of their own biomarkers, where would you recommend people start?
Things like sleep and activity, in terms of like, and this is something you can get with any sort of activity fitness tracker, just start collecting that information, be more aware of your trends. So even if you're not worrying about sleep stages or things like that, just understanding like, what time are you going to bed? What time are you waking up each day? Is there consistency there? Are you, these concepts of things like sleep debt and like, are you sleeping 3 hours a day during the week, and on the weekends you're in bed for 12 hours because your body is just like broken down. These are really interesting insights, things that you should know. Activities, we could talk about things like steps and all that. And, a lot of people, I think it could be a motivating factor for certain people if they just want to get more active. And so don't worry if it says, 10,000 steps. To me, what's more important is whatever number your baseline was, and you add 20% to it, that just means like, hey, you did 20% a little more. It's an easy win to kind of say I've increased it. Kind of do that. Something like heart rate variability is a good one because it's easy. It's very easy to track, and I think it's something that you can get some insights back for. And again, when I talk about you sort of being more in touch with your own body, it's something where you can kind of wake up and kind of be like, well, how do I feel today? And maybe you feel very refreshed, and then you'll see like, does that map to the data and to the trends? Other people will, it depends if they're trying to just understand themselves a little better versus resolving some things. I think a lot of people, especially executives and people in you know, kind of trying to be high performers, you know, we're often, you know, they're going to say like, I sleep terribly. I'm super stressed out. I need to lose a few pounds. Those are typically the three sort of things. And so, you know, obviously just body composition, get a like a smart scale, just start tracking, you know, have those baselines, and you don't even have to look at it obsessive every day. It just takes like a minute. Just do it consistently, like whatever time of day you're going to take that measurement, whether it's like right when you wake up or after, you know, after food or coffee or before, you know, using the bathroom. That's fine. And then I'd say, you know, that's pretty much, some people will do things like if I'm working with like helping people out or a client or a friend, and let's say their goals are like, you know, body composition and all that, we'll have them keep like a meal log. I often just have people take photos of their meals. It's all time stamped. You know, I built an app a while back that like basically just lets me upload pictures. I don't want to count calories. I'm not big into like you know, I just think you can learn a lot just from the photos, because I can see the time of day. I can see when the person always eats that later snack. I can always see when, you know, if someone's skipping a meal or the portion sizes are off or whatever. So I do use like a tool like MyFitnessPal, like maybe once a year or so, just as like for a few days, like 3 days, for just for like just to check where things are at. I usually don't, if I'm making a change to my diet, like let's say my goal is, okay, you know, I want for the next 3 months, I want to put on a little bit of muscle, extra muscle and all that. So I might change my macros around a little bit. So I just want to see what was I eating, count those up a bit. But yeah, I think for most people, we can use these tools that are, you know, low friction. That's the main thing I'd say. You know, you don't want something that it's too much of a burden. And so, yeah, I think that people can start simple. I mean, even like glucose tracking, it's sort of like, it's easy to do. Anyone can start doing it. But again, what are the insights? What are the actionable insights they're going to get? They might say like, I'm looking at my levels when I, you know, fasted every morning. And, you know, am I in a pre-diabetic range? Well, that's an important number to know, like, because you might go to once a year and go get, you know, your a blood test, and they say, you know, you're fine, because at least in the United States, like the ranges are not what matches up with the longevity groups, and they'll say you're fine until all of a sudden they're going to say, oh, you have you know, type 2 diabetes. But like, there's that range in the middle where you're going from green to yellow to red, and that's something that happens over decades, basically years and decades. And so being just aware of where you're at with those things, it's just a nice insight. Just to be able to say like, I'm doing fine. Things like, you know, tracking your personal glucose response to foods and all that. I think that's a little more advanced. I think you don't need to be there right away. I just think having some basic understanding of yourself and where you're at, even if you're doing blood work, like, you know, most people are not going to know how to interpret their own lab test results. So they'll get the lab test. Keep in mind, often the reference ranges on the blood tests that come from the labs are not, again, they can vary. And if you go to longevity circles, they'll actually show you the reference ranges or what they feel are kind of more optimal. So the value you have might look good on one reference range, but actually might not be as great on another. But yeah, I think, you know, it's really, I think the idea is to start simple. You have to kind of not get a million things, a million devices. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff out there. I get to play with a lot of cool devices and technologies, but it's kind of like, it's more advanced. It's like start off, you know, it's like before you drive the Tesla, it's like go learn how to drive a stick shift, right?
Of course. Yeah.
It's easy to find my website, my blog, where I document a lot of this is quantifiedbob.com. So it's pretty straightforward. And if you go on to social media like Instagram, it's just Quantified Bob. You know, I'm in the process of building some tools and technologies around basically making some of this stuff accessible and easy for people that aren't data driven. So like I have myself and a friend started it started as a side project. Now we're doing a little more with it. It's called Awesome Labs. And so if you go to isjustawesome.com, you'll see some of the things we've built. So first one was the meal tracking sort of app. Another thing that we've launched is it's a breathwork app. But not trying to be meditation mindfulness. It actually lets you dial in the different inhale, exhale, hold duration times. It's a utility. You can keep it. You can actually like have it off and in silent mode, and it'll vibrate and just tell you when to do your patterns and and things like that. So it was something I built originally for myself because I wanted the tool. I couldn't find something I liked, and so we're building some really cool things.
Did I see, Bob, that you have a gym or a center in New York?
So the facility opened up in New York City. I guess it's kind of like the first biohacking fitness-based recovery facility. It's called Hacked Fitness. Started by a friend of mine a year ago. I had some different equipment that I was just using for myself and friends and another location. They allowed me to kind of move some of my stuff there. So I'm just really good friends with them. I've been supporting them since they launched. But it's really cool. It's all about data-driven exercise and recovery. So you've probably seen these facilities, these types of facilities are starting to pop up around the world, where you kind of go in and in 25 minutes, you basically get a week's worth of exercise, like using this precision computer controlled, like strength training devices. And on the recovery side, there's other tools. Cause I do think, the recovery is just, if not more important than the training side. But yeah, so it's been great to just have access, to this type of facility. So it allows me to just be able to like apply a lot of the things I like to do, and whether I'm training myself or helping out other people. Yeah.
Brilliant. Do they have ARX there?
Exactly. Yeah. So on the strength side, they've got the ARX machines there. On the cardiovascular side, there's a AI driven sort of, it looks like a spin bike called Carol that essentially gives you like an hour workout. Basically, if you went out for a run in less than 10 minutes by just doing these two 20-second sprints, it's like super efficient. And so there's training or like that kind of stuff. All sorts of modalities and tools for measurement and quantification. I have some of my equipment there. It's more around oxygen training. So there's a system called Livo2 that and so for me that's like it's been it's my glue for everything else I do. It's like a nice thing to throw in there into the mix. But yeah, and so it's really great that these types of facilities are opening because obviously these are things you couldn't necessarily have in your home. They're just these machines, like the ARX machines, are like they're just big, and you can barely get them into a building. So so the fact that it's becoming accessible, where anyone can just go and kind of start training, and you only have to train for 25 minutes, basically of strength training a week, and your body is broken down enough to where you feel like you're not working out enough. Then you wait a week, you go back again, you realize the gains you've made, strength gains.
Yeah. So Bob, if you were to give 3 tips to any executive that's looking to improve their personal and professional performance, what would they be?
3 tips.
Yeah, 3 tips. Everybody hates this question.
Well, okay. So the first one I guess I could think of would be, it's actually 3 in 1 in a way, but maybe we'll just count it as one. I don't know. You tell me. There's this quote that I kind of use as one of my mantras. And you've probably heard it before, where they tell people like everyone should find 3 hobbies: one that makes you money, one that makes you healthy, and one that makes you creative. And I feel like for me, throughout my life, like I guess it's something that's carried through where we're all busy and focused on business, and in the ideal world you can combine all 3. But even let's say you separate them, like I've always been an entrepreneur, I've always been doing things. The healthness and wellness has always been a very big focus in my life, and creatively, like I've been a musician playing in bands and stuff, like 20 plus years. So the outlets, having those outlets and pieces, I feel it makes you feel fulfilled, and not it gives you other ways to apply your brain and doing different things. So I just feel like people they're so driven by one thing that I just feel like you need to have these other outlets, and maybe someone feels like they're not creative, but it could be just another, interesting hobby that, they might not realize if it is creative in a way. Like there could be someone like I even things like writing software. It's very creative in a way. I enjoy it. I would say, if I had another one, again, these are just things I've kind of learned and applied to myself. Especially when we talk about things like stress, like I've just learned not to really sweat the small stuff. Like, when in a situation where you can easily just get triggered or like get worked up, I always say, okay, is this a situation that is out of my control or something I'm in control? So an example I'll give someone would be like, you get stuck in line at a store, it's slow. It's like, well, okay, is it just a busy hour or whatever? Is it something like, why am I going to get angry if I, or people who go to the airport, a flight gets canceled and they start yelling at the ticketing agent. It's like, but it's the weather. It's like, there's a snowstorm outside. Like, it's not like it's not good. It's, it kind of sucks, but you're redirecting anger at other things that you just can't control. And and along those lines, I say if there's a third one, I learned that the concept of willpower and decision making, I view it like a gas tank. It's a fixed resource. So you have so many decisions you have to make throughout the day, especially as someone in business or whatever. You're constantly putting out fires. You're making all these decisions, and so we have to realize is, and these are the types of, for people who are more like these micromanagers, you have to realize, like, save your willpower, your decision making for the important stuff. If there's things that less important, even if you don't agree with the decision, I would say, like, you can delegate that stuff out. And if it doesn't put your entire business at risk, or there's a lesson, let other people be able to make some of those decisions, and if the risk is not great, don't feel like you have to make every single decision, because then you're worn out by the end of the day. I've even measured some of these things. Like there's a device called the Brain Gauge, where it's a cognitive assessment tool. And I've done tests in the morning and in the evening to see, like, where my scores went. And it's pretty much really high on all these other categories, but there's a fatigue metric. And you would see the fatigue metric in the evening just be like, you would see it go down. It's like, is your body, you spent the whole day. So the idea is minimizing that fatigue, maintaining the willpower in your decision making.
Thanks, Bob. I'd like to just say I'm really grateful for you coming on the show. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
I'd like to thank Bob for his time and his amazing insights. Remember, if you would like to access our content 1 week before it's released, please leave your details at www.upgradedexecutive.com/subscribe, and we will send you a special link so you can access the videos 1 week before we officially release them.